Disintegration caught my eye when it was announced at Gamescom just a few months ago. It's a sci-fi FPS coming from an independent studio founded by the co-creator of Halo. And as a fan of Bungie, I was inherently curious about this game. The CG announcement trailer looked pretty slick and familiar, plus the idea of commanding troops from a hoverbike is actually original. Fast forward to now, we've got the technical beta for Disintegration. It's live on most major platforms for the next few days. I've sunk a solid 2 hours in so I could share some initial impressions. Before we dive in, here's a quick rundown of what Disintegration is. In its current form, this is only a multiplayer beta, so there's no single player, no story, no campaign, no context there. It plays out like a normal FPS multiplayer game. There's 4 people on each team. Each person controls a pilot and a crew. Combat is a mix of FPS and RTS because each pilot has different abilities that you can shoot and cycle between different weapons, and you also have troops that you can command and control to take out enemy troops and enemy pilots. It feels a lot like a hero-based shooter in that way, so an Overwatch or a Rainbow Six Siege, except Halo Wars or SOCOM because you're controlling troops at the same time. And like other multiplayer games, it's got a domination mode where you have to go capture A, B, and C, and an escort mode where you have to pick up a core and drop it off so a rocket can launch into the air. Those are the only 2 game modes, and there's only 2 maps in the technical beta. That's certainly a summarized version of what the game is, but I hope that gives you guys an idea if you're coming to this completely blind. What is Disintegration? That's it. And one of the big things that separates this for me is the movement, because in Disintegration, like I said, you're on a hover cycle. So the entire time you're controlling your altitude. You can't go like really high. It's not like these are planes or anything. They're called hover for a reason, so you have to stay close to the ground. In that way, it also feels like Titanfall because you're constantly in your suit, and I think another apt reason that is a good comparison is all of the troops that are on the ground. It's not quite like the AI in Titanfall. They're not just running around doing their own thing. You can control them, but it does feel similar because you're controlling this machine. So does this weird mishmash of things work? It's hard to say yes, in my opinion, because it's such an interesting clash of genres. I think that's what they were going for, to kind of mix things up. But you're hovering around, you kind of feel slow and weighty. In an FPS, I don't know about you guys, but I like to be quick. I like to be able to move around. I don't want to feel like I've got concrete in my boots or in my hover cycle in this instance. It could be that this feels more comfortable to people who like playing games where you're controlling a mech. And I just have never played a game where you control a mech outside of Titanfall, to be completely honest with you guys. So for me, I think the best description is that it felt floaty. And I don't want to feel floaty in an FPS. There were so many times in my 2 hours of playtime where I felt that I didn't have the best control over my hover cycle. It didn't feel responsive. I couldn't react to what was going on screen, and I'm sure there is a skill gap, and I need to play more in order to get better. That's every single game. But a lot of games have the innate ability for you to pick them up and immediately get it, you know? You just understand what the game is going for. I did not feel that with Disintegration. Right now, there are 7 different pilots with their own crews in Disintegration that you can play around with, and it plays out in a very hero shooter style. It's a rock, paper, scissors between 3 different stats. You've got durability, handling, and speed. At least right now, there's no true class system, so there's not like a tank, a DPS, and a healer, but they definitely fall into certain categories because some of them have very low durability, low health pool, you die easily, whereas others are more durable, slower, deal more damage. But circling back to the movement issue, I never felt comfortable with the slow pilots. It never felt comfortable for me. It was the game constantly pushing back on what I was trying to do, which was get from point A to point B, and that felt frustrating. As a result, my favorite pilots were Neon Dreams, Tech Noir, and The Business, because all of them had high speed and handling. It felt more appropriate for what the game was asking us to do. On the subject of these pilots, in the presentation department, I know we're in a multiplayer technical beta, but I wasn't super impressed with these different heroes, so to speak. They didn't really have enough personality. I can definitely see what they were going for. One of them looks like a clown, one of them looks like a knight, another one is a DJ in a sort of 80s synthwave vibe. I get that. but I don't think they pull that off very well. Maybe that is where the story comes in. We might get another beta that has a story mission that explains more about why these people are the way that they are, but it seems disconnected from the rest of the experience, where we're dealing with more of an Anthem-like world where things are more realistic, but at the same time, we've got these kind of frankly goofy looking models and characters playing around in a multiplayer space. The gunplay is another area that I think needs a lot of work because there's not a ton of feedback on your shots. From a very mechanical perspective, when I'm shooting another pilot, there's no difference between my shots connecting or missing. There's some sort of audio visual feedback. Maybe there needs to be more rumble in my controller, but if you're on mouse and keyboard, that wouldn't really matter. I'm not sure what the issue is, but from a design perspective, I think there is something that needs to be tuned or tweaked. There just needs to be more feel with the shooting. If this is intentional, I understand their thought process because you are on a hover bike, you're weightless kind of, but I think that just defeats the purpose of an FPS in general. To make a comparison, it's not a similar game, but Doom. It does a wonderful job with their weapons. When you shoot a shotgun, it blasts you back, or at least it feels like it does. There is weight and purpose to the guns. I never felt that in Disintegration. It wasn't all terrible. Some of the abilities felt good in my hands. The Marksman Cannons were my favorite because they were the closest thing to a natural FPS feeling reaction when you're shooting a gun. Outside of the whole hover cycle thing, the most unique thing about Disintegration, obviously, is commanding troops in your squads. And overall, this system felt very cluttered to me in a 4v4 multiplayer space. Before you can even jump into multiplayer, you're forced to do a little training tutorial that shows you how to use your troops, how to use your hover cycle. And in that context, it did make sense. And that's why still it feels like in a single player setting, Disintegration would feel much better to me. But when you introduce that to a 4v4 multiplayer match, it was just cluttered. It was chaos. None of it really gelled together. In the typical FPS game, you have two things to worry about: the gunplay and shooting your enemies, and the objective. Those are the primary things, right? In this, you've got the gunplay, the objective, you've got the troops that you're controlling, and you've got the altitude of moving up and down. Now, you could argue movement is also a part of FPS, but I feel like it's a whole other beast, a whole other animal when you're asking the player to juggle so many systems. It just doesn't fit in a puzzle together. Commanding your troops feels nothing like a MOBA. It's not a constant string of minions that are all on your team that are attacking towers and you have to kind of guide and work around them. It's you've got to control these guys at all times. And a lot of the time, I found them running off kind of dying on their own or not being super helpful when I was carrying out my attacks in what I saw as favorable situations. Who knows? Maybe I'm just not very good at this game and it requires more game time for things to gel together. But even outside of what I was doing, it didn't seem like anyone else around me was finding success with their troops and really utilizing them in the game the way they want you to. If you couldn't tell already, if it wasn't abundantly clear, I'm not a huge fan of Disintegration in its current form. I'm glad they did this multiplayer technical beta so they have a bunch of people to test the game and give them feedback, but my feedback isn't great. I'm going to give Disintegration a few more hours of playtime before the beta ends, just so I can maybe find some semblance of enjoyment in it, but I couldn't find the fun factor in what I played. And to be completely brutally honest, I'm not sure that I will be able to. It may just not be the kind of game for me. Maybe their vision is completely different from my expectations. Maybe they are going for a slower paced, strategy-based RTS, FPS fusion of genres, but I think the strategy side of things needs to be shored in a bit if that's what they're going for. In any case, I'm still going to keep up to date with Disintegration. Hopefully they have a story-based beta in the future. I do want to see what this game has to offer outside of multiplayer. I think I would enjoy it a lot more. I love the art style. The initial announcement trailer really drew me in just from a visual perspective and the way that it looks. And I could see myself having a real blast controlling my troops in a single-player campaign. That is all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, remember to hit the like button. I'd really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to turn on notifications if you haven't already so you don't miss another one. Thank you guys so much, and I will talk to you next time.